Welcome to Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy, the podcast where insights and innovation meet. Every episode, we dive into conversations with industry leaders, experts, and change makers, bringing you the stories and ideas in the renewable energy sector that shape our world. And now, let's jump into today's episode with your host, Wes Ashworth. Welcome back to Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy. Today's guest is someone who's made a bold leap from oil and gas into the heart of clean energy. Joining me is Steve Newby, CEO and owner of Bravo Infrastructure Group, an investment platform focused on the transitioning energy economy, and it fully owns both Sunshine Solar and Radiance Solar. Sunshine is one of the leading commercial and industrial solar installers in the country, while Radiance is a turnkey EPC that's delivered over 125 megawatts of solar across more than 300 sites throughout the Southeast and Mexico. Steve's path here is anything but typical. He previously founded Summit Midstream, built it into a $3 billion oil and gas company, and took it public. Now he's bringing that same energy to renewables, scaling Bravo Infrastructure Group's portfolio, navigating supply chain and labor headwinds, and pushing for deeper collaboration across the solar industry. Today, we'll get into what inspired his transition to renewable energy, the biggest challenges in scaling a renewable energy workforce, the future of storage and grid infrastructure, and what solar can learn from traditional energy. Let's dive in. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Wes, and appreciate that intro, and congratulations on all your success as well, too.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really excited about this one. I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So as I mentioned there, you've had a really incredible career founding and taking Summit Midstream Partners public before making the full pivot to renewables in 2020. What led you to make that leap, and what was the moment you knew it was the right move?
Yeah, I spent, I've spent 25 years in oil and gas, and in 2020, like you said, made the leap into the renewable space. But really, the growth in the space and then the energy transition overall is something I believed in and thought was going to occur. And there was going to be a growth catalyst in the solar space particularly, but in energy transition overall. So I saw it as a great opportunity, honestly, to bring some of the skill sets I have developed from founding companies and growing them over to a space that I thought was going to be really ripe for a lot of startups and a lot of growth in the industry.
Yeah. And coming from the oil and gas sector, you bring a unique perspective to renewables. I think one we can learn a lot from, which we'll get into that as we go. But what was your biggest surprise when you transitioned to solar? What did you expect to be the same, but maybe it turned out to be very different?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I get asked this a lot. I think one of the biggest surprises I had, positive surprises, was the growth in the space has just been much greater than I thought. I mean, this was before the IRA and in that catalyst. And I thought the growth was going to be pretty significant. It's actually been exceeded my expectations there. One of the biggest surprises was, frankly, just how young the industry still was in trying to accomplish a pretty significant growth platform in growth expectations, right? You now had a real industry that's trying to get a lot of projects done, a lot of growth done across multiple areas, and didn't have, like in oil and gas, when we had this during what we call the shale revolution. We had a 100-year-old industry behind that of norms and processes and how you partner with people and how you get things done. The renewable space just didn't have that. It's developing that along the way. And so now that creates tremendous opportunity for folks involved in it as well, too. So, but that's probably some of the biggest challenges. And I've said many times to folks, I've built billions of dollars of energy infrastructure, and solar is the hardest thing I've ever built. And not because of the technical aspects or the engineering aspects. It's really labor and supply chain and just the volatility of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few things you mentioned there that I want to dig into a bit further. So oil and gas, known for deep partnerships, which we talked about, and scalability, structured project execution, while renewables are still finding their footing in a lot of ways in some of those areas. So what's one key lesson from your experience in traditional energy that solar companies should adopt right now?
Yeah, well, I think they are adopting it. And I think you mentioned it. It's sort of partnerships and how you approach projects and partners and vendors and suppliers and to get things that you need to get done. I think
Yeah.
it's again, when I say somewhat new, I mean, we're talking about in the last maybe 5 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, but we're real growth in industry where you're trying to get, developers are trying to get, depending on what area you're in, gigawatts done a year, or definitely tens or hundreds of megawatts done a year. And I think one of the things that is coming to the space, or has come
Hmm.
to the space, is just how you partner with various, us as an EPC, but suppliers, module suppliers, other labor suppliers. How do you partner with people to be able to get things done? And how do you look at the long game in doing that and look multiple years out versus a project by project basis? Can sometimes be tough because you got to try to make every project work. But yet you have 50 projects that you got to make work over the next couple of years type situation. So I think
Right.
that's the biggest thing, is the industry maturing,
Yeah.
becoming more sophisticated, planning better, because planning is the key to be able to partner.
Absolutely. And in one example, so in oil and gas, you partnered with Exxon on a $500 million pipeline project. I guess comparing that to how partnerships work in renewables today, what's missing? What needs to change for the industry to operate at that higher level of collaboration, as you mentioned?
Yeah, that was a very large pipeline project
Yeah.
right before I left Summit that we developed. And Exxon's not an easy partner, but they're a fair partner, and they're realistic, and they're very detail oriented, all the things you would imagine from a big major.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned it earlier. I think the ability to plan ahead, the ability to see the long game, the ability to not try to squeeze each side of the equation, both sides, our side,
Yeah.
your side, is something that is starting to occur more, but needs to occur more in planning ahead multiple years. That's the key for some of these. I mean, if you look at one pipeline project versus trying to do 20 or so projects in solar, they may equal each other the same dollar amount in our space, which is distributed generation. But they're similar in the sense of you got a partner long term, and how do you make it work? And so I think the space is getting more sophisticated in that you're starting to see it all over the place. Obviously, you've seen it on the supplier side, the vendors of modules to be the sort of the easiest example. But we're having a lot of discussions with our customers about partnering more long term over multiple projects, and how
Yeah.
do we get things done over the course of a couple years, not just a couple months.
Yeah, no, I love it. Love the comparisons too. And it's good to see that it is already happening, and that we're starting
Mhm.
down that path of heading towards that. And I think there's a lot that this industry can learn from oil and gas. And it's been around a long time, obviously, and successful. Regardless of what you feel about it, it is a successful
Yeah,
business
that's right.
that's
And
grown in scale.
it's had to build tremendous infrastructure too in short
Yeah.
periods of time as well. So there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, there's differences too, but there's a lot of similarities, particularly how you approach sort of multi-year solutions with various partners. And if we're going to get what we all want to get done in the energy transition, we're going to have to approach it that way. I think it's got to get out of this sort of, like I said, per project type analysis
Yeah.
into more of a, how do we accomplish this over the next several years together?
Yeah. Absolutely. Transitioning a little bit to Bravo. So you've built Bravo Infrastructure Group into a major player with Sunshine Solar, Radiant Solar under its umbrella, scaling from small lifestyle business to a company with over 100 employees now in just a few years is no small feat. Anybody who's ever gone down that path knows it's no small feat.
Especially in solar.
Exactly right. What were some of the biggest growing pains, and what key decisions made the difference?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to hear much different than a lot of people in the solar space. I think the volatility in the solar space is hard on everybody
Yeah.
in the space. The political volatility, supply chain volatility, I think makes it more difficult
Yeah.
to plan long term, to scale long term. The biggest decision we made was to integrate and buy an EPC. I bought Radiance in 2022, right around Thanksgiving of 22. That was a big decision. We brought in a capital partner to recapitalize the business there and then to execute our growth plan. And that's probably the second biggest decision, is sort of the area of the market we felt was underserved, underutilized, which was a distributed generation EPC that can operate and partner with developers across geographies.
Sure.
We operate all throughout the U.S. and work with customers, we'll work with customers and projects in Illinois and in Georgia and in New
Yeah.
York. And so that was the biggest decision. Was no surprise our strategy. What strategy were we going to? Because we really remade the company when we purchased Radiance, and that decision was key for us on just what strategy we were going to take and what part of the market we were going to attack. And I think we've been fairly successful in developing that, and are still developing it. We learn every day.
Yeah.
So for sure.
Absolutely. Something I wanted to go back to that you mentioned earlier was that solar is the hardest thing you've ever built, not because of engineering, but because of supply chain and labor challenges, which is wild, right? But I guess why is that specifically? What are the biggest hurdles companies still need to overcome? And just, can you expand on that, just that whole topic a little bit more?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer. I wish it was, but it's because it involves multiple things. I think it begins with the solar developer's decision timeline is long.
Right.
Multi-years. So it's sometimes across multiple regulatory changes, frankly.
Yeah.
We're seeing one now, right? Somewhat of one now. So I think that adds tremendous uncertainty to the folks who own the projects and are trying to get them done, which adds uncertainty to us who are designing and building them as well, too. So I think the supply chain, historically primarily being overseas, adds to the complexity of it, particularly when you add in tariffs and other policies that are trying to protect companies here, but they for sure add complexity to the whole process of developing a project. So it's regulatory wise, it's supply chain wise. Labor is a big issue. Skilled labor in this country is at a premium, no matter what industry you're in. I don't think that's new, other than for somebody like us, one of our big advantages is we do have skilled labor that we move around the country.
Yeah.
And can bring to bear. So, but that's an issue that a lot of folks are facing, which is just not enough skilled labor in the space. And it's exacerbated as we onshore more, right? Because we're using skilled labor to build all the factories and build everything else. So,
right.
And then finally, you're building a power plant, right? With thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of little power plants called modules.
Sure.
That you're trying to connect all together. You're trying to do it across many, many acres with multiple trade labor on site that you got to coordinate, and your logistics got to be on point on when you get things delivered and how you time things out. So the process and the logistics of solar is somewhat unique versus building a big gas plant, building a big pipeline. And so those are all things that make it challenging. And we're in a very dynamic market right now. We're trying to figure out really what's the cost of power is going to be.
Yeah.
And how does that because that ultimately reflects throughout, right? Is what can you get a PPA executed for? What is that? And who's going to bear that? And how that comes through the whole channel of supply, be it EPC or vendor supplies. So I think that's another big challenge we're facing now when we're, for the first time in 25 years, in a power generation demand growth market.
Yeah, big time. Thinking about just the supply chain side of that, right? And you see a lot of people even you saw in 2020 pandemic, I think supply chain issues became an issue for everybody across the board, like overnight. Sure. And it was interesting to see the companies that still found a way to succeed in that, got creative, sort of thinking out to the box and how do we overcome these supply chain challenges and still get product and get our business out there and do what we need to do. Anything like that came up in terms of just maybe a creative way you've overcome some of those supply chain issues within solar, or something that you found has worked for you? Yeah,
I think it's been, for us, it's been more labor. And then for us, it's a lot of times we still rely on a lot of our electrical component switchgear, transformers. A lot of those parts and pieces and components come still from overseas. And so I think the biggest thing for us is really happened in the last 18 months or so, which is diversifying our supplier base.
Yeah.
And continuing to do that as much as possible. We obviously try to onshore as much as possible too. There's incentives to do that, but just from a diversity of supplier standpoint. And by the way, I don't think this is unique to solar. I think you saw after the pandemic, a lot of industries do this.
Absolutely.
Where they got caught where, they had one or two suppliers, but they were both in China or both someplace that you just couldn't get materials out of. And so I think we're no different there. I think we're diversifying quite a bit and try to manage it as much as possible. I mean, we just did this last week on a project where we we flipped sort of a transformer from one project that we didn't, that it was dedicated to, that it looked like it was going to be late,
Yeah.
to another project that we had more time on, and we sourced a onshore transformer for that project that had a shorter time period. So it's
Right.
something it's hand to hand combat every day.
Uh-huh.
So on things like that.
Yeah, no, it's like a big chessboard, right? Like
It
kind of
is.
moving all the pieces in the right order and strategically thinking about it a few moves ahead and things like that too. Like it's a very complex thing to succeed at, but yeah, you're doing it obviously. Transitioning to a couple different topics as we get into it. So we talked about the future of energy storage and grid transformation. And you said before that batteries are the key to solar's next evolution, which I would 100% agree with. What's the breakthrough that will unlock true baseload renewables, and how close are we to that reality?
Yeah, I think we're getting closer for sure. I mean, battery. So I'm a newbie in a lot of ways to renewables, no pun intended. And so, I see it from somewhat of an outsider's perspective, right? Or at least a new person's perspective. For the first time in the last couple of years, for the first time ever, we have the ability to really store electricity. I mean, pump hydro has been around for a long time, and batteries have been around for some period of time, but in scale and in really the technology's gotten to a point in where it's cost effective as well too. So that's exciting. I mean, that's a whole new world, right?
Yeah.
I think we're all still trying to figure out. At least I am, and our company is still trying to figure out how it's all going to be deployed. I mean, we're seeing it obviously in the utility scale space right now. I think you're going to see it in the DG space quite a bit as well too. I think those models may be different between DG and utility scale, but solar, it's all going to be, the development of the battery market is inherently positive for solar because it addresses one of the biggest issues, which is intermittency of solar. I mean, it helps utilities address that and others address that. And so inherently it's going to be positive.
Right.
I think long duration storage, which is coming, longer than 4 hours sort of norm, is coming, and we'll see how that gets deployed. And I think a lot of people are waiting to see how that gets deployed. So I think all of those are positive, and I think it's sort of the next leg. I view solar as sort of, we're in the third stage of growth. The first stage we were taking market share away from coal retirement, right?
Yeah.
So generation wasn't really growing. But we were transferring it or transforming it from coal-fired generation to natural gas and to solar, and solar was taking some of that market share. Second big growth catalyst was the IRA, where we said, hey, we're going to really incent for renewable generation. And we put a lot of money, and states did too, behind that. And that was a huge catalyst. Again, taking market share away from other generation sources. The third is probably going to be the best, which is meaning because it's true market driven, and in that we now have generation demand.
Yeah.
That the market is driving, and we need all sources of generation. And I think that generation demand is going to be primarily met with natural gas, solar, and eventually modular nuclear. And so I think, we're in that third leg where it's market driven now, and not just taking market share, but it's driven by actual generation, electric generation growth, demand growth. And we haven't had that in 25 years. So
right.
I'm old enough to remember when we did, but
Yeah.
we haven't had it in a long time. So that's how I sort of view it. And batteries are going to fit into that demand growth very well and allow for what we call greening of the grid, and where we are able to put on a lot of renewable generation and then add flexibility to the grid with batteries to store that and use it when needed. So I think that's sort of where I see batteries playing out. And I think there's just going to be, there already is a huge growth market for battery. I think it's still only going to get bigger going forward.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've said this before, like batteries are kind of in the center of everything, right? Like storage, it's hard to have a project where storage isn't somehow part of the equation. And you're seeing a lot of that expansion happen, seeing the investments happening in that space as well too. So, and as you mentioned, like we're going into now, it's a growing demand, and growth has kind of got to happen regardless. So
yeah, I'll give you an interesting anecdote. I mean, I was with the utility last week, and big utility, and discussing sort of their their peak demand periods. And, we all, I thought, I'm sure others listening to this do, utilities peak in the summer, right? Hot day in July. And that's when they hit their peak. Utility told, sort of blew me away that, they're also seeing peaks now in the middle of the night in winter.
Oh yeah.
And the reason is more people turn to electric heat and, and they're and it's cold in the middle of winter and they're starting to see peaks hit 2-3 o'clock in the morning in the winter.
It's interesting.
And guess what's not producing at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in the winter? Solar.
Right.
So, so the ability of batteries to store that during the day, and we're in the middle of the day in the winter, you're not using a lot of that, but you are producing solar energy to be able to use that in the middle of the winter. That, it just an interesting anecdote that I think you're seeing the sort of the demand curve move a little bit on utilities too, on what they're seeing on their sides.
Yeah.
So by the way, that meeting happened last week, so it was news to us.
It's relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of amazing how quickly it evolves. Like, it is a fast moving industry. Like in some ways it's slow moving, right? When you talk about projects and things like that, but it is evolving really, really quickly in terms of just our usage and what's happening and everything else.
You're bringing up a very relevant point, which is the industry now is a growth industry. It's moving fast. It hasn't been that way historically. Oil and gas has been and still is, and the regulatory market is much more dynamic in the oil and gas space, particularly on the crude oil side. It's state regulated primarily, and it's one of the comments that I have for our Public Service Commission here in Georgia all the time when I meet with them is that I think the regulatory framework has to change somewhat, or these utilities are trying to respond to a more dynamic growth market in a framework that was really set up for not a dynamic growth market. We're seeing challenges on that front, right? Overall, it's why you have connection queues that are 6 years long or some crazy things like that.
Digging into that a little bit. So interconnection, connection queues. Many in the industry focus on just building more capacity. Grid infrastructure is struggling to keep up. What's the biggest bottleneck when it comes to interconnection? How should companies prepare for these challenges?
Yeah, I think interconnections are, I think for us, they're not as big a challenge. In the DG market, they're not as big a challenge as you would imagine. We're usually building, 2 to 20 megawatt projects, and they're just not as big a challenge. Utility scale market's a huge challenge. I think you're starting to see and are going to see more and more regulatory changes come out. And by the way, there are challenges for solar's just been all of our generation growth over the last several years. That's changing. Gas is going to become more prevalent, so you're going to see it there too. So I think you're going to see, or have seen, and going to see more focus on trying to address those interconnection queues.
Yeah.
In some places, they're 4 or 5 year. It's just it's crazy. I don't know how you develop a project in that where you have to wait 5 years to get a interconnection agreement. So I think I think this is where the feds and state regulators are going to push into, lean into, and try to get, and they already are with some of the cluster things happening in the PJM and in the Carolinas as well too. I think you're gonna see some regulatory changes there. And look, with the power demand that the country is looking at, you're gonna have to.
Agree.
We're gonna run into some real problems. There's a reason a lot of utility scale developers go to Texas.
Right. Yeah.
There's market reasons, and also just you can get projects online.
Yeah.
A lot quicker. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's coming, if nothing else, as you mentioned, just by necessity. You can hit a point where demand continues to go up, and it's like, okay, we've got to get new power on the grid. It's got to happen.
That's right.
So I think that'll occur, but it'd be nicer if it was a little faster.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it can all. I think it's going to get better, and this is where regulatory change can help.
Yeah. Touched on another topic you hit on earlier. So you built and scaled teams both in traditional energy and renewables. I know there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some differences. What's harder about attracting or retaining talent in solar, and what can companies do to improve? Yeah,
I think one of the issues is just, we mentioned it earlier, is just the industry issues of volatility. I think doesn't help any of us.
Right.
That attract. I mean, when people ask me, I get asked a lot, what are your 3 top things, challenges or whatever? I mean, talent retention and attracting talent and retaining it is one of the top three. It always
Yeah.
has been in my career. I mean, your company's only as good as people who work for it. I think the volatility in the solar industry doesn't help any of us, frankly, and the regulatory, political whipsawing doesn't help attract and retain talent. And then just, we're a unique construction firm, right? We build solar, we build power plants, but I mean, we need skilled labor to do that. So again, just in general, the industry, amongst other industries, is trying to compete for labor that other industries are competing for as well too. An electrician in the oil and gas space is an electrician can do the electrical work in the solar space,
Right.
for sure. I mean, it's So you're competing against each other as well too, in a situation where you just have a general lack of talent, skilled talent anyway.
Right.
So I'd say volatility in industries is probably number one. And IRA, I think, helped solve some of the volatility. I think that was one of the good things of it, is tried to give the industry some baseline, but we still see it day to day, and we're trying. Now oil and gas is back to somewhat of a growth platform as well too in areas, and so I think they're competing heavily for talent as well.
Yeah, thinking about that. So there's major shortage in renewables. We've already covered a lot of that in skilled labor. I guess what's the real root cause? Lack of training, lack of industry awareness, something else? And then what do you think the industry can do about it? Like, what are some solutions of how we start to build up that skilled labor in the industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a core issue for the U.S. labor force in general. I mean, not only necessarily solar is affected, but we went through a long period of time where we just didn't build a lot of things in the country. We offshored a lot of things, right? A lot of things were sent to other places to be built that were more economical or theoretically more economical, right? So we lost and we tried to pivot to a service-based economy, and largely have. And now, since the pandemic and since COVID and for a variety of factors, by the way, I think a lot of these are very good ones. We want to onshore a lot of that production that we over a 50 plus year time frame offshore. So it doesn't happen overnight,
right?
And you have to retrain, wages have to recalibrate, skill sets have to recalibrate to be able to now build a lot of things in this country. And by the way, that's not just power plants. That's, manufacturing facilities. That's all sorts of industrial things that we're onshoring. So I think it's a core issue with the labor market in general that we're going to face. It's inflationary, not deflationary, unfortunately. And solar has to find a way to compete effectively for that labor. And I think we have, and it's not going to get easier. It's probably going to get harder in a certain sense. And so it's something we're quite aware of, and it's something. So we invest in our people. You asked sort of what do we do? What we do, we invest in our people. We have our own apprentice program. We have our own training program. And so we try to create situations where we're investing in our employees also.
Right.
Training them and providing them opportunities. And I think all good companies do that and try to do that. So I don't know that we're unique. I think, but we do it as, our biggest investment as a service company is our people, right? We don't own power plants. We design and build them, and our people do that. So we try to make that conscious effort to invest in our people.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points there. And I'll shift topics, just try to cover as much as we can in our short time that we have. But yeah, you sit on the advisory board of Orion Infrastructure Capital. You've worked extensively with private equity. You've grown and scaled companies. So a lot of wisdom and learning there. I'll ask this question. If a renewable energy startup founder came to you asking for advice on securing private capital, what's the first thing you tell them to focus on?
Well, that's a good question. I think it depends on what area he or she wants to be in, because that depends on somewhat what kind of capital you get and who you partner with. But I think the biggest thing is who you partner with and how you want to do that. I mean, ideally, you are able to prove your business plan out first, have some modicum of success, and then be able to show that to capital providers. The space is still heavily investing in renewables, despite a lot of chatter over the last few months. It still will. It's a huge growth industry. It's great for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
It's going to be great for entrepreneurs over the next decade. And so I think the biggest thing is have your business plan, prove it out if you're able to on your own. And don't be discouraged. You got to, your desire for success has to be greater than your fear of failure, is what I tell a lot of folks who talk to me about this issue, and a lot of young people who want to, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur when they grow up, I guess. But but I think you have to be able to take no. You have to be able to take failure. You're going to fail. It's inherent in starting businesses and scaling businesses. You're going to make mistakes. So you just have to plow ahead and stay true to what you believe in, and try to prove it out. And if you are able to prove it out, you're going to be able to raise capital. And capital finds good businesses, amazingly. So sometimes it finds bad businesses also.
Right.
For sure. So that's what I would say. And we have a lot of that in this space. I mean, there's a lot of people who have started in the space in, 2005 who didn't do a lot, and all of a sudden, bam, they're running, get some tailwinds, and they're running big companies now. And have had to learn how to do that. It's a whole nother dynamic of running a big company versus startup is much different skill sets.
Absolutely. What's the biggest thing you've had to focus on as you transition, right? You're in startup phase and you get kind of further down the road. You're kind of like that small, mid-sized company to then going, large, as you're saying. I know it's very different running that company, a very large, multi-billion-dollar company or public company or what have you. As people go through that progression and getting to that larger size, from your experience, like what's the biggest thing that you have to change as a leader to succeed at that level?
Yeah, I think it's when you're starting up, it's whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
And, you're trying to put out fires daily.
Yeah.
And I think what I tell folks is don't be afraid to do that. You got to do whatever you got to do to be successful. I think I've seen people come from large companies to try to do a startup and not be successful because they're not used to, if I got to be the IT guy, if I got to take out the trash, if I got to do this, I got to do it, right? You got to do whatever. You got to humble yourself and do whatever you got to do to be successful. So when you're in startup phase and you're trying to scale a business early on, you're sort of doing that. I think as you move and the business matures or starts to mature some, and you start to become a real company, and I think you always have to basically, but more so, start to think about, okay, what are the next key pieces I got to put in place, be it people, process, strategy, for longer term success. So you start to then be able to focus more on the long term. And then then I think as you get bigger, right, and you're running you're CEO or you're senior management of a company, I think really the mentality I take is I work for my employees, right, and what I do is I allocate capital, be it human capital, financial capital. They sort of tell me, here's what we need, and I try to figure out how to get it for them.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by I work for them. And so I think you get to the point where, and you got to be comfortable getting to the point where you get good people running the business day to day, and you're figuring out, one, how to support them, but also how to create that long-term sustainability. What's the strategic thing we need to be doing, thinking about making contacts with folks that benefit the business and help you longer term. And some people have difficulty going from tactical early on, a lot of hand-to-hand combat, whack-a-mole, like I said, to as you grow, you got to get more strategic.
Yeah. And
you got to take the view of, I now work for my employees. I got to support them. What do they need to be successful in running the company? Because, I think if you're having, as a CEO, if you're having to run the company day to day, that's a problem.
Yeah, sure.
A larger company where you're having to really dictate that is a sign that there's issues, usually, in my experience.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you do see that a lot. There's some really, really sound words of advice there and some really good stuff in that. We got a little bit of time left. I want to rapid fire kind of hit some key things here. I always love talking about misconceptions. So You mentioned even in this conversation, one of the biggest misconceptions about solar is the true economics of the industry. What's the most common myth you hear, and what's the reality from your side of the equation?
Solar's an intermittent resource, and
Yeah.
so it's definitely lowest cost of energy when it's dispatching. I don't think there's dispute on that, but the industry's got to realize we don't dispatch 24/7. So that needs to be. I'm just stating facts.
Yeah.
That's the reality, and right. So
Yep.
in a lot of and even more now, energy demand is a 24/7 type demand with data centers and industrial demand that runs 24/7. So I think that's number one. Number two, on the positive side for renewables,
Mm-hmm.
is it's April 1st. And this isn't an April Fool's joke, but we're at $4 natural gas.
Yeah.
That is, we are in what we call a shoulder month, Wes,
Oh.
which is usually when we don't use a lot of energy because it's sort of cool outside. And it's not real hot and not cold enough to burn electric heat pumps. And so we're at $4 gas. That's high. It's one of the highest shoulder months I've seen in quite some time.
Yeah.
And so if you want to know what's good for renewables, let gas run up to $6 or $8, and we'll see the true cost of natural gas power generation. And all pretty quickly.
Something we've also hit on. There's a lot of buzz around onshoring, solar manufacturing, all of manufacturing, but specific to solar manufacturing. Some say it's a game changer. Others say it won't make a dent. I guess, where do you stand on it? And then how do you see the supply chain evolving?
Supply chain absolutely is evolving to onshore. We incented that heavily. State incentives, heavy federal incentives. So people tend to do what you pay them to do. And that's what they're doing. And so it's definitely evolving to onshoring, both racking. We own a racking company. We own a solar canopy racking company called Quest.
Mm-hmm.
We get all of our materials onshore or in the U.S. I think you're seeing it across the board. You're seeing it for switchgear, seeing it for transformers, just slower. That's been harder to onshore. I do think it's going to make a huge difference. I'm concerned about what that means for costs longer term. I mentioned earlier that not necessarily deflationary, although there are hidden costs in the supply chain. I think that will come out as we move to onshoring. But I do think it'll make a dent. I think it's it's huge for the space. I think it's a positive for the space, particularly in this tough time where we're looking for positive political capital. I think onshoring's been a big one, frankly.
Yeah, no, absolutely agreed. One more here. If you could wave a magic wand, fix one major issue holding the industry back, whether it's policy, workforce, supply chain, financing, any of the things we've talked about, I guess, what would it be?
We got to eventually do away with the ITCs. I think the political hot potato of the space. By the way, I think politicizing energy overall is the wrong path to take, be it hydrocarbons or renewables. I think energy is a natural, strategic issue. It's a national security issue.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be politicized. So I'll say that. I think longer term, we'd love to get off the ITC. I'd also love to have more open and free and fair trade and not tariffs. Panels in Europe, panels in Spain are 9 cents a watt. Panels in the US are 35 to 40 cents a watt. So I think those two sort of go hand in hand. So I think if I can wave a magic wand, though, I think we'd all love to have the space be supportive of the demand side of the equation and not incentive side of the equation. And I think we're getting there. I think the ITCs have been phenomenal. I think the ITCs have worked. I think I think that's why they've been renewed by both Republican and Democrat federal administrations. Is they've worked, and they've lowered costs dramatically, and I think ideally I'd love to get away with it because I think it creates a situation where it adds volatility to the industry that I'd love to get out of if at all possible. And someday, you said dream big, so someday we'll hopefully get out of that, and this space can stand on its own, and I think it can eventually.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think if I had to choose, it'd probably be something very similar to that. A few more questions as in closing. So when you think about the next decade of renewable energy, what excites you the most?
Wow. I think, as I said before, I think the demand side piece of this. So the fact that we are going through generation demand that we just haven't seen in a very long time. And it seems to be, and it's enormous. I think that excites me. I think the technology revolution and changes that have come and are coming and still to come in the space are going to create a lot of opportunities. And are going to be the leader in getting us to a more economical space to get us off tax incentives. It happened in the oil and gas space, by the way.
Yeah.
Technology drove efficiency. I think technology is going to drive efficiency in the renewable space. And so that excites me. I think it excites me to see all the start. I mean, I love to see startups. I love to see new ideas. I think people coming to the space, and I think that's going to be great. And then, Wes, we're going to see a tremendous, as the space, naturally, this occurs in every high growth industry, you're going to see tremendous consolidation in the space.
Right.
So as the space matures, you're going to see a lot of consolidation. That's already occurring. It's occurring in our world. It's going to occur all throughout the value chain of renewables. And I think that's exciting as well, too, from just a guy who likes business cases.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I am.
No, agreed.
I like business cases. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's a challenging time, right? Like there are plenty of obstacles and things like that and things to figure out, but it's exciting. Like, I find myself kind of getting fired up about it every time I talk about it, of like, hey, the future looks pretty promising. And as you said, the demand is there. That's increasing. So things have got to happen regardless of where you are. So
I tell people I started up an oil and gas company during the Obama administration. I bought and grew a renewables company during the Trump administration.
Yeah,
and have been lived through all of them. So I try not to let the political winds get me down or up too much, and focus on creating a sustainable profit. The best way you do good in this world is you have a profitable business and you do good by your stakeholders, your employees, your shareholders, your community. And to do that, you got to have a successful business. And so I sort of focus on that versus some of the herky jerkiness of it's hard not to follow it in this space, but
agreed.
I'm trying to stay positive. And there's a lot of positives. Renewables it is then the generation growth source. It will continue to be a large source of generation growth. We cannot bring a gas plant on in a couple months. That takes a long time too. So trust me, we're still in for a lot of growth.
Yeah. That's so good. I love
They've been
all
on
of
both
that.
sides.
Yes.
I can tell you.
All right. Final question. If listeners just remember one thing from this conversation, what should it be?
Nothing. I think what we just touched on, stay positive. I think for those that have been in the space much longer than me, I think they went through a high of the IRA, and then they went through a low of sort of getting beat up here over the last few months.
Yeah.
I think try to stay out of that, focus on your business, focus on the positives, and we still have tremendous growth in this space. And take away that, the greatest thing going now is we need a lot of electricity generation growth, period. Forget where it comes from for a second and just say the amount of growth we need, it's got to come from multiple places. It cannot be sourced by just natural gas, by just nuclear, by just renewables. It's going to be sourced by all three of those. And that's the big change now, is that we're in a market the market is determining our growth, not some policy or some other piece of legislation or change or what have you. It's really market driven now. And we've gotten the cost curve to a point where we can compete pretty favorably.
Yeah, absolutely.
And batteries help that, as we mentioned. So quite a bit.
Absolutely. Perfect way to wrap it up. That was so good, that last point. So with that, we'll wrap up the conversation with Steve Newby, CEO of Bravo Infrastructure Group. This has really been a fun conversation. Steve, your journey from oil and gas to building one of the most ambitious solar platforms in the country is a testament to what's possible when experience meets vision and when bold leadership drives real change in the energy space. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy, share it with your network, and stay tuned for more conversations with the trailblazers shaping the future of clean energy. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy, was brought to you by Lee Group Search. If you enjoyed today's discussion and are looking to recruit top talent for your company or find your next career opportunity in the renewable energy sector, visit leegroupsearch.com. Let's continue driving the future of clean energy together. Until next time, keep pushing toward a greener future.